Good evening, all. Quick audio check. We'll get started in a moment. Good evening on the East Coast. Good afternoon on the West Coast. In the notes, we're going to do some custom city real estate analytics and have some fun, some interactivity this evening. Post in the notes what city you're dialing in from. I'd appreciate it. We'll get started in 30 seconds. Perfect. Beautiful Napa, California. Duluth, Georgia. I was just in Napa actually not too long ago. Beautiful part of the country. West Columbia, fantastic. I'll pull up some reports for that as well. Hot summer. Excellent. Perfect. We'll have some fun with that for sure. All right, we'll give it another 20 seconds and jump right in. Napa, Duluth, West Columbia. All right, let's see. For those of you just joining, feel free to post where you're coming in from, and I will pull up some custom updated real estate reports for your market. Don't be shy. All part of the fun. Chicago. I was just talking to some of the ADAC team there today. All right, we'll get started in about 10. Perfect. All right. So just to show I wasn't pulling your leg, and we've got a great CE lined up for us tonight. So perfect. 8 o'clock, let's jump in. So, yeah, what I was suggesting here was the data. Data is key. And right now, it is a wild time. So, as we look through, yes, the data becomes increasingly important. And as I share my screen, you should be able to see some of these individual real estate analytics. So, we'll touch on some of these, but in terms of rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, demographics, it is a ever-changing market. And even when looking at newer availability, right? Here's Napa. Uh, Beautiful spot. I used to live in Santa Monica and Marina Del Rey and sneak up there every now and again. Again, interesting perspective. There are currently 48 properties, 68 spaces currently active for lease in the greater Napa area and West Columbia, South Carolina. Right, here's some of the current availability as well. So we'll dig into each of those reports. But first, bit of housekeeping. So welcome everybody. If you haven't attended one of these in a while, we appreciate it. Cirrus, we're now into our 32nd year in business. It has been a privilege as we have currently supported over 13,000 doctors in that history. And we continue to support doctors, let it be early career doctors, buying or building their first clinics, mid-career doctors, a lot of lately, expanding, renovating, or relocating. Or especially most recently, we're seeing really a flow of doctors that are preparing their clinic for sale and are realizing that the banks, as I was in Dallas 2 weeks ago, the banks will not issue a long-term loan if there's insufficient term on the lease. So Tonight we're going to get into some really good, fast-paced, hard-hitting updates in terms of what we've been seeing in terms of changes over the past few years, and God knows it's been a wild time. Just to help customize some additional content as well, if you can, give me a little bit of background on your situation, real estate situation. Do you own, do you lease? What stage of the career are you? And a little bit of information regarding the leverage with the landlord you may have. Let that be leases coming up, leases month to month, or 1 year into a 10-year term, etc. And if you're curious about some of those market or demographic reports, we'll touch on some of those shortly. So please take a quick second for that as well. All right, so the theme tonight is what do we need to know? What the heck is this crazy thing called the office lease? Why is it my second biggest hit to overhead? Why is it impacting so much of my EBITDA and earnings and profits? And realistically, if you've never read through your lease, this is a perfect time to dust it off, and we'll keep things very, very high level, but give you some good specific knowledge pearls as we go through. My name is Eric Pook. I'm the president and owner of Cirrus Consulting Group. It's been our privilege, as mentioned, over 32 years in business. I'm the current custodian of the business, and we had a great mid-year update with our team and really helped to give ourselves and our clients a good perspective of the growth we've seen year over year over year over year. We have some of our staff have been with us over 22 years, some 16, some over a dozen. It is remarkable in today's age to have that sort of success and tenure as we help. What do we do? Ultimately, what we want to help is to reshift your perspective of the lease as it pertains to your first clinic, your second clinic, the saleability of the clinic, and the expansion. I can't share with you how many times we review the lease with the doctor after they've signed it and they say, oh, shoot, I only wish I knew about you previously. So we wanted to really dig in, let it be from Newburgh, Oregon, where I was a week ago at the ADEC facility, Dallas, Fort Lauderdale, recently was also in beautiful Charleston, for those of you coming from South Carolina tonight. Really some great examples of dynamic real estate markets. And unfortunately, landlords or others that see the profitability of a dentist or are perceived that the dentist is exceptionally profitable and therefore can afford the big rental rate increases or can afford the premiums. With that being said, we'll touch on how to maximize those flexibilities, how to leverage yourself into that negotiation, including some core key best practices that we've picked up over the past 33 years. 32, soon to be 33. Why do we exist? Again, there's always an inherent challenge. Follow the money. As we know, the regular, broker commissions, those sorts of things are typically commission based, and the more the doctor pays, the more that will be paid through to the broker. That's fine. That's how that world works. That's how, right, the families are fed, etc. But again, it's important that you've got someone that's not being paid for by the landlord helping to advise guys and support you through the process. And, through that perspective, we've truly been able to help save, in our case, over 480 million, as you can see from our website, in terms of making some great savings in terms of rates, annual increases. So how? So ultimately, doctor, you guys are the best tenants on the planet. You've got the highest build-out costs, you've got the lowest default rates, you're in the same location for 26 and a half years on average. Yet the feeling we have all the way along is that, oh, I don't have the landlord. Oh, the landlord has me over the barrel, etc. So why then, if we're such a great tenant, why do over 54% of dentists overpay in rent? Feel free to throw some of those in the notes. Why? Why do you think so many doctors are overpaying in rent? The first we hear is, well, we don't know what we don't know, which is, if I were to ask you, when was the last time you compared your rent to market price? Many would say, well, Never, or maybe not since the past 10 years, or the last time I negotiated it 15 years ago, type of thing. So, when looking across, let it be Manhattan, where we did a CE course at One Bryant Park not too long ago, or LA, my old hometown, certainly there's a huge swath of data that most doctors truly don't understand what is the fair and equitable market rent for that area in that building, etc. And quite frankly, we don't know either until we've typically spent about a half an hour to an hour that a real estate operations and analytics team go through that data. So what do I mean by that? So when we look at data, let's look at Columbia, West Columbia, and let's just look at some of these availabilities. I'm just looking at any of these par chance. So just looking at some regular retail type spaces. This is some of the software that I pay an ungodly amount for this type of license data. So what's helpful here is to be able to understand, what it sold for, how long it sold for, what are some of the other tenants. We want to look at some of the market conditions. We want to look at how rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, and other pieces have impacted. And, what's your leverage? So if I was a dentist in this particular building, what's very interesting is if you were to leave, it would take the landlord on average 17.3 months to fill the space. Also, the amount of leased activity here in West Columbia has decreased by 48%. So it's been cut in half year over year. So rental rates have been pretty constant. Vacancy rates for this property is up around 60%. So if I'm a doctor in this space or close by, right, that gives me some great leverage. Data then becomes important. So, hey, what is it for the greater, Columbia, South Carolina market? What does that look like for the individual submarket? So here it is for West Columbia. Here's the changes in vacancy rates. Here's the changes. Here's the pain the landlords are feeling today. Here's the availability, inventory, and then all of these, what's called KPIs or key performance indicators. These are sort of some industry jargon for what should fair and equitable market rent be? Why is the asking rent much higher than the typical average? Why? What's the rent per square foot? What's the market cap rates? Other sort of real estate specific terms, but all of which creates just data upon data upon data upon data that, certainly as your chair side every single day, don't have time to review and update. But when it comes down to the situation of dealing with that renewal, the lease then becomes the biggest check that you will sign in your personal or professional career. So, part of the reason why I share this is the more information we have, the better. And just to make sure we can see some of that, if you couldn't previously, let me know if you can't. But here's some of these sort of data components. So as we look at it through the building, as we look at it through the comparables, and again, the submarket reports that we can literally break down any and all of this data. So as you're approaching that renewal negotiation, the more information you have, the better. Feel free to throw in any Q&A as we go. But this is the type of process we spend in the background long before we ever pick up the phone to the landlord. So you're the best tenant on the planet. So why? Why do so many doctors overpay in rent today? So part of that is without knowing. Hey, Eric, I don't know what my market rents are. I don't know what comparables are. I don't know what the landlord down the street might be willing to offer in order to entice me to move down. In addition to that, the other thing to be aware of is timing. The best time to start a lease renewal negotiation is typically at least 2 years prior the eventual lease expiry date. Number one. When does the average doctor typically start the renewal negotiations? 6 months if you're lucky, but again, if the landlord's stalling, delay, etc., sometimes three, sometimes two. And unfortunately, there is something called an option to renew deadline. That's something that you want to know, put in your phone, get a tattoo with it, whatever it takes. The more things, the better, because if you fail to notify the landlord of the date and your intent to stay in the space at the end of your lease, if you don't notify them in that 6 months or in some cases 12 months, those remaining two 5-year options become null and void. And the landlord can put whatever new standard form lease, whatever new terms, demolitions, relocations, and ask whatever new rents, which of course can be devastating after working so hard for so long. So the data becomes key. Rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, all of these type of aspects that can become a very big component to that eventual negotiation. Lastly, as we go through it, and again, just looking at some examples for those of you that joined early and shared some of the locations, is again growth. So the interesting component that most doctors don't look at or have a resource or otherwise is what's going on with my patient base. You know your patients better than anyone else, but what does the forward-looking piece look like? And some of the data and looking through some of the developments and that sort of data, it's interesting to see, how many children, right? If you're doing some pediatric work, if we're doing some Invisalign, if we're leveraging the gray wave type thing and being able to place more implants and focusing on a elderly demographic type thing. Maybe we want to focus on specific types of race or Hispanic origin. We've helped some doctors do multi locations on that front. Household sizes. Hey, I really want to focus on that young family type practice. I also want to focus on, right, those with certain home values, those with certain pieces. Where are my patients coming from? All the way down to consumer spending. So, where are my patients and, potential patients in my community, 5 mile radius of where you're at today? Where are they spending their money? All the way down to a business plan perspective where, hey, the amount of money that's being spent on health and personal care is $14.7 million right now in 2024. The estimate in 2028 is to 17 million. So now the question is, hey, look, if I'm thinking about building out that new space or renewing my lease on the corner of Sunset and Central, great. There's 22,000 cars that are traveling to and from in front of my clinic. And also now I know what that, estimated growth might be. So when I share all of this is the type of data, let it be Napa, let it be Duluth, Georgia, Chicago, right? Manhattan, any corner, it all starts with the data. The other thing that can be important too is we've had the privilege of, leveraging and working with clients from Anchorage to Honolulu to Key West and Newfoundland and everything in between. So each of our own proprietary data really helps to frame that negotiation. So that's the data. Again, the Q&A is open, and we're going to keep things fun and interactive tonight. So feel free to post any questions as we go. So as I said before, you are an incredible tenant, yet on the whole, without following some key best practices, you may fall into the trap where you overpay in rent, where you don't necessarily leverage your leverage, nor have the ability to truly understand what your business would be meaning to a landlord down the street. And we've worked with a number of doctors, including a doctor that recently gave us a 5-star Google review in Boston. We were able to secure her over $293,000 for tenant improvement allowance. Basically, the new landlord covered the entire new build out. And the doctor really wasn't even thinking of staying. Yet, because of the opportunity there was, because the landlord down the street was sort of sick and tired of nail salons and hair salons and, restaurants and those sorts of things, right, created a really unique opportunity for that doctor to get a great ground floor space, looking at it through the eyes of your buyer. One thing that we do typically as a society is, we think about ourselves, think about number one. That's fine. But if you're about to sell your clinic for 1.1, 1.8, or $800,000, You really want to think about everything through the eyes of the buyer. And if you're thinking of selling within the next 10 years, then all the key decisions you should make should be around that preparation for sale. Do I have personal guarantees on my leases or other commitments? Right? Do I have any liability if I was to ever sell the clinic post sale? Am I in a situation where I'm not as profitable as I could be, and that's going to impact my value, right? Are my patient base increasing, staying the same, decreasing? The mistake we typically see is the doctor wants to start to wind down, go from 5 days to 4 days or 4 days to 3 days, and that takes what would have been a massive potential exit, right? And then declines as you decline, and well deserved to step back and do a little less and try to balance between the confines of work and trying to enjoy our very quick lives on this earth. So the seven main negotiables. So what should we know? The another great pearl here is there are so many different valves on the wall, meaning there are so many different points of leverage and incentives that the landlords can do in order to make your less money come out of your bank account. The other way of looking at it is the landlords have found lots of ways of being able to keep as much money into their bank account as possible, which is, a challenge. But in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate for. So, number one, base rent. Of course, everybody thinks, great, the landlord asks for $40 a square foot. I'm going to come in at 38 and we're going to meet at 39. That's the extent of the negotiations. The first half of the first page. Yet there's another 76 and a half pages of other stuff in there that can have a dramatic impact to it. In addition to that, annual increases can be a huge impact, specifically when looking at the time, no different than looking at mortgages or otherwise. That interest rate or that 3% annual increase, etc., compounds and increases every single year, and you've now brought yourself up into the world's most boring roller coaster, going up 2, 3, 4, 5% per year. In addition to that, common area maintenance. So one of the additional components we see quite a bit is doctors not realizing common area maintenance can be negotiable. It becomes, for some, 50% of your base rent is going, or rent is going to the triple nets, taxes, maintenance, insurance. And that's fine. However, right, it is negotiable. So we want to keep as much money into your pocket as possible to either A, keep rates, the annual increases or a cap on that common area maintenance, or things like an amortization schedule so that if they're going to redo the roofs or parking lots or otherwise, they can't just pass down that $30,000. The more things there, the better. In addition, also making sure that there's things like audit rights or exclusions to things. Why are we paying 15% administration fee? Why are we paying for additional brokerage or financial or legal fees for empty units on the other end of the building? These are the type of things to be conscious of as we're going through the process of the lease negotiation. Fixturing, if you are doing any sort of build out, it should be such that while you're physically not seeing patients and generating any revenue, that should be deemed a fixturing period or up until the point that you're up and running. Many cases, we see all too many often, the doctor signed a binding letter of intent, right? They've only got a couple of months worth of help, and suddenly, long before the contractor or zoning or other pieces are done, suddenly now the rent's kicked in and you are ready to go. So the earlier the better you can help secure these pieces, the better. Tenant improvement allowance, be cautious. Sounds good, looks good. What it is basically the landlord offering a certain amount per square foot in order to help cover the cost of the build out. Sounds great. However, right, in most cases, the landlords are not in the lending business, nor do they want to be. And they tend to build that rent as it is not free money. They will typically build that into the base rent, annual increases, common area maintenance, etc. I share that because just be cautious. It might be far better off to ask for zero tenant improvement allowance. And if you didn't ask for it, why is it there? So how much less could our base rent get to? right? By not taking any of that tenant improvement allowance. So to visualize that, um, I've just prepared this for us today. So if you can see this part of my screen, I just did a key number of inputs. I took a 2,300 square foot space with a lease starting on August 1st of 2025, 10-year lease, $25, 3% annual increase, no free rent, right? And triple nets of roughly $10 per square foot, probably on the low side for a California or other type property. No other inducements, no other financial perspectives. The key takeaway based on the theme of tonight is understanding what that lease or letter of intent or proposal or renewal amendment that you're about to sign in between patients represents to the landlord and represents to you. It is a check. The lease represents the largest check that you will sign over time to any other personal or professional entity in your lives. In this one key perspective, here is within a 10-year term, with year one works out to be 80,000 per year, and you think, oh, that's manageable. I'm doing about 1.1 million of production. My collections is about 900,000, and my patient rate is increasing by about 10%. But that's not the number to focus on. The number to focus on is how much is exiting your bank account. And that over the next 10 years is $927,456. Therefore, yes, get angry about that. Don't just sign that renewal amendment. Don't just agree to that 5%, 10%, or recently a 50% increase in rent. These are the type of things where it doesn't take much. Heck, just looking at the tiniest little changes, just like your mortgage. If we were to look at, for example, total cash flow, one of the main reasons how we pay for ourselves each and every time is to help justify, let it be a decreased rent, let it be a few months worth of free rent. But even look at this, even just a buck or two per square foot, plus some additional inducements from the landlord, free rent, etc., works out to be almost, right? In this case, we're 60 grand to the good in terms of savings between what the landlord was offering versus with a couple of changes in variables can save. So that provides a meaningful impact to the saleability of your clinic and helps to keep as much money into your pockets. Again, for those of you that just joined, I see a whole surge. Questions or other components in the chat, and happy to keep things customized and keep everyone on our toes and having a little fun this evening. So again, why do we even need a lease in the first place? Right? Why do we sign it? Why don't we keep it month to month? And interesting on the poll results, I'll pull those up in a second, but from that perspective, how do we help to leverage it? So first of all, it should be able to give us fair and affordable financial terms. The landlords, right, should really be almost a partner in this, in some cases, asking for a percentage of the practice sale proceeds to assign the lease. I've seen a few of those lately, but ultimately it should give you the predictability, continuity, of the stability of your clinic. You don't want to have to pick up and relocate. One of the key things that, for those of you taking notes, I cannot stress enough, prepare yourself for the unexpected. And heaven forbid, if something were to happen to you, and I can think of two recent examples which had devastating consequences. But the earlier you can prepare yourself for that, as heaven forbid something were to happen to you, or just like my godfather that tore his rotator cuff golfing and could no longer practice wet finger dentistry, having something called a dental specific death and disability clause can be invaluable. There was a devastating example of a doctor of 42 years of age built out a beautiful six-operatory clinic. 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, had died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients. Guys, how much is that clinic worth? I won't do a poll for that one because the answer is pretty straightforward. In this case, it was zero. It was less than zero, actually, right? The bank secured their components, their loan amount from the life insurance policy. Unfortunately, the landlord went back to the spouse and said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for the 9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. I share that because had the doctor had some additional professional help, had added some specific clauses to the lease, that could have given the spouse what could have been a 2 year or a 2 month exit, right? Instead, it took years to be able to try to transfer that out because every doctor in the area knew of the situation, and unfortunately, were offering pennies on the dollar. The flexibility is key. Do you have an exit, right? Do you have options? What is your commitment to the landlord? And equally, what is their commitment to you? And then the biggest component that we really don't see a lot of knowledge about is what's changed, especially post-COVID. The banks and the risk perspective is still high. If, for whatever reason, there is an issue within the lease, if there is insufficient term, if there is a demolition, relocation clause, clauses in the lease that gives the landlord the ability, regardless of what's left on the term, the ability to push the doctor out or terminate that lease early, or even to ask. I saw one last week, just to ask the landlord to transfer the lease. The landlord had the right to terminate the lease just for asking to sell. So these are the type of things in preparation of. I shared this before, but other examples, 5,000 a month, 3% annual increase over 30 years, you're there at the $3 million financial commitment. Dallas was just there last week. This was a situation where the landlord in the renewal wanted, right, 11% from the client's expiring rent. Then, by approaching it with the data, with other recent comparables in the market, we were able to keep the rent the same, right? Minor increase thereafter, which certainly resulted in over 40,000 just within the next 5 years. Also secured multiple options for their future buyer, right? For over 3,000 square feet. In good old Boston, this was a situation where, again, coming through to renew, right? We were able to relocate, secured a significant amount of free rent, significant amount of tenant improvement allowance, 10-year term, 2 5-year options, and lots of a benefit to the buyer. If you're thinking, Eric, you know what? I don't know. I don't want to make any more investments into my space. I'm thinking of selling, right? I just want to maximize my profit and enjoy a good retirement. I'm not looking for anything unreasonable, etc. One of the key things I can't stress enough is to have your lease professionally reviewed. If you have not had someone go through it line by line, look for some of those red flags, and or make you aware of where some of these red flags are, then please take the time and take an hour to have someone or a firm like ours be able to go through those rental rates, demographics, vacancies, etc., and other comparables in the market because you definitely don't want to be hit by a surprise. There was a doctor north of our office who recently got the practice valued and then had found out that a local broker had signed him up for a 15-year renewal, which he thought was a little odd. But hidden in there, the landlord had the right to substantially renovate the building, which was the equivalent of a demolition clause. The practice broker decreased the price of the clinic by $350 per square foot, all because of the inherent risk that the buyer was taking on that might pay the $1 million today for the clinic, right? And then turn around and have to pick up and relocate it, right, in a year or two down the line. So these are the type of things that can become, again, a huge surprise. This, again, another great example of, understanding, do I want to stay? Do I want to potentially pick up and move down the line? Right? This was to have the information. Figure out what the best possible deal is to stay, and also what the best option is to move down the street, and then compare, right? And that's part of our process, typically each and every time. Some other key pieces of interest is the good old 1099 versus W-2 perspective. Anyone on your payroll, quote unquote, Are they, right? Are they all employees? Do you have any hygienists? Do you have any specialists? Do you have any OMSs or orthos that are coming into your clinic once or twice a month and on some sort of a revenue share type model? If so, you do want to make sure that within your lease you have the ability to bring in other businesses. Dr. Jane Smith, right? Pediatric dentist that comes in twice a month for some of the complicated cases. In many cases, landlords can deem that, hey, this person is working here for tax reasons or otherwise, is working here and using these two operatories. Maybe they're paying you rent, maybe they're not, maybe it's a revenue share, maybe they're not, bunch of different aspects. But again, some landlords can say, oh, no, 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 that is someone, an outside entity that is generating revenue, or you are collecting some sort of money from this outside business working into the space. So, in things like the assignment section of your lease, this one core component could easily give the landlord the ability to either A, increase rent, or B, right, look at this as an unapproved sublet. So we've always been in the opinion of 32 years of advising doctors through the lease negotiations is to help ensure that proactive investment versus reactive cost. For those of you, the 22% of you that own your space, fantastic, right? What becomes important here is the ability, the ability to make sure that you've got a plan. So as you go through, you want to make sure that you have help. You want to understand that if you do own your own building, very important that you've got a lease to separate the real estate corporation from your practice corporation. I was on with Bob Gray, who's quite famous dental specific accountant and part of the National Academy for dental accountants. And, it was his opinion that, especially in preparation for eventual sale, if you do, are you required one? No, right? But one step down, he couldn't have suggested it in more specific terms. Heaven forbid you were to pass away, or if you did want to keep the real estate as a passive form of income post sale, right? And that becomes key. So, where does all this fit in? So, your professional advisors and your professional team become very, very important. There's some questions about accountants and lawyers and whatnot in the Q&A. Feel free to continue to post as we go. So, as you look at each and every situation, your situation is unique. As much as you think it's the same as everyone else's challenges, every little situation is different. So, of course, if you have a personal attorney that has done some of your will and estate planning, if you have not done your will and estate planning, I didn't until I bought the business, but right, don't forget it is just as important for your assets versus your liabilities, right? Working with a merger and acquisition attorney before you sell, so you've got things lined up, can become very, very important. Have them look at the lease. These are great components to ensure that you have everyone on your professional team aligned for your big life moments. I'm about to buy a new clinic from scratch. I'm about to build a new clinic from scratch. I'm thinking of adding a second location. That absolutely, right? Myself included, accountants, financial planner, personal attorney, corporate lawyer, or some of our internal pieces. We've got all sorts of key resources that you should build around you to ensure that you've got the right guidance at the right time to help ensure that you've got the most tax efficient strategies, you're minimizing the amount of risk, and certainly as we fit in, helping to make sure that you've negotiated a very fair, right, and financially viable risk lease to minimize some of those risk and components. Hopefully that answers the question in the Q&A. Profitable transition. So let's touch on that. For those of you thinking of selling, and let me check that number. I think that was a fair chunk of those joining today. So for those of you thinking to sell, fantastic, right? Again, create a 10-year roadmap to that profitable sale. Ask your accountant, what are some of the key things I need to do now to minimize any of those taxes on that exit event? Is it an asset sale? Is it a share sale? Right? Do you have any of your family members as non-voting shareholders? right? What are some of the strategies that can be done? And it depends, let it be throughout the US, Canada, etc. Obviously, lots of different jurisdictions work with your CA or CPA, but ultimately realize from the lease perspective, that can be just as important. Number one, you want to really look through the assignment provision. The first thing your practice broker is going to share with you and look at, do you have the right to transfer the lease? In most offers of the buy, sell, letters of intent, etc., when you're looking to purchase or sell the clinic, it's typically conditional upon two things. One is the ability for the buyer to get financing. Number two is the successful assignment or transferring of the lease. And it sort of makes sense. What's your clinic worth without the keys? So the assignment provision, for those of you following along at home, that can be worded a few different ways under a few different titles, but ultimately it talks about, can you transfer the lease, right? And what is the process that you and the landlord have to go through for the dance to allow them to agree and accept the transferability of that lease. Number two, rental rate increases for sure, right? What does your EBITDA look like today? And suddenly, if the landlord is going to dramatically increase rent tomorrow, right, then the more things you can do today to help lock in or minimize those long-term expenses for you and your future buyer are key. I mentioned before the consideration. If you see the word consideration in the lease for the assignment, that is can be a red flag for sure. If the landlord says that they're entitled to cash goods or any other consideration from the sale of your clinic and the assignment of the lease, that is a red flag. That now means the landlord has, in essence, become a silent partner. And we've seen some language in leases lately that basically say anything other than goodwill, equipment, those sorts of things. Basically, the tenant improvements that you have in the space, the flooring, the walls, the paint, the plumbing, the electrical. Typically, some practice brokers will list that in as $150,000 of value when showing what the practice is worth. Landlords have now added language in some cases that state that that money is mine. Meaning you don't own it, doctor. The second you put in that wall, put in that carpentry work, whatever it takes, that then immediately switches over to be the owned by the building. You're using it, you paid for it, but that asset now becomes that of the landlord, which is affixed to the space. What do we need to do about that? Well, first of all, you should make sure that there is nothing in the lease that, in essence, allows the landlord to profit or collect exorbitant fees or collect any percentage of the money you're receiving from your buyer. Number four, surrender. Be cautious. If you do just say, oh my God, Eric, I'm done. I want to move. I want to buy my own building down the street. I'm going to buy a plot of land. I am done leasing. I get it. However, look at it from the side of the buyer. Buyers love ground floor retail. They're coming out of dental school thinking ground floor retail. I want to be next to that, Publix grocery store, whatever that is. So looking at it through the eyes of the buyer, but there might be language in there that states that you must return the space to pre-dental condition. In other words, that could cost your buyer $20, $25 per square foot if you ever wanted to leave, throw the keys in the ocean and say, I'm done. We touched on death and disability. Personal guarantee is one. I didn't put that in the poll questions, but if you do have or have signed personally, or the lease is in your name personally, that is something, and you are incorporated, that's certainly something you want to help address prior to the sale. The more I did a CE course not long ago in California, and the doctor said, no, sorry, Arizona, Phoenix. And the doctor said, yeah, it was a nightmare. I sold my clinic. I didn't know I was personally guaranteed. The landlord kept me on the hook for another 5 years afterwards. And there were tons of sleepless nights that if the new doctor defaulted or damages or any sort of issues with the performance of the lease, that selling doctor was fully on the hook personally. So these are the type of things I share, not to be alarmist, but to be aware of. And it's much easier to know than to not know. And more importantly, come up with a plan and strategy, especially if you're coming up for that next lease renewal within the next 2 years, for example. So, on the good note, as we go through, we will be going through each and every one of these terms and clauses in nauseam for the next 5 hours this evening. Yes, and the lines are lighting up. I'm kidding. But this is a good one to screenshot. This is just some of the dozens of clauses we look at as part of that lease review process to understand what the dental impact, dental wording that should be specific to that of your lease, and to ensure it's aligned to your long-term vision. So, one practical example this evening. Here's one clause we pulled from a recent lease. It's in over 75 of them. Take a quick second to look at some of the red flags within this one core section within the lease. Hint, there's more than one. Okay, what was the first red flag we noticed? The big one, obviously, is this. The very first piece of the very first line states that you cannot sell or buy the clinic without the landlord's prior written consent. Full stop. Ultimately, what does that mean? That means that the landlord has an ungodly amount of control and can delay, withhold, condition, who knows, and can make life very difficult for the saleability. Great conversation with your merger and acquisition attorney is to ask, how much of an issue have they seen? How many lease assignment or lease negotiations have they done through the sale of the clinic? And more importantly, how much of a headache can this provide or can it prevent the sale? And we were on recently with Dr. Tom Schneider, who does a lot for Henry Schein's dental practice transition team and really creates a core plethora from start to finish. In addition to that, number two is be cautious of this. What are the actual mechanics when you do go to sell? So again, for those of you 62% thinking of selling within the near future, the land or buying, right? The landlord has three options. You ask to transfer the lease from seller to buyer. The landlord says yes, right? The landlord says no, or the landlord can terminate the lease just for asking to sell. I did a lecture at Thrive Live this year in Las Vegas for Henry Schein, and there was an example of the doctor that came through from San Francisco and said, "Hey, my wife's a dentist. We were purchasing our second clinic, and when I went to the landlord to ask about the lease and the terms, the landlord looked at him and said." You're paying for the clinic? He said, yeah, yeah, it's a good clinic, $1 million worth of revenue, etc. Right? And the landlord said, why? Why don't you just do a deal with me? Right? Heck, all the lease is up in a couple of months. I'll do a new lease with you, right? And hey, I'll do a deal with you directly. You don't have to buy the clinic. I'll just I'll charge you an extra 10%. I'll do a deal directly with you. So now ask yourself the question, what happens if the landlord said no? What happens if the landlord refused to assign the lease or condition it or didn't like the financial status of the buyer? These are just some of the core components to be aware of for that. You certainly don't want any terms that the landlord can change the rent upon sale. As I mentioned before, you certainly don't want anything with that consideration or where the landlord's now entitled to, and this we pulled from a recent lease in terms of consideration, where anything that again, the landlord can do in order to increase their profit when you sell, you want to protect. And last but not least, the biggest shocking component to most doctors is they can't believe that even after they sell, they will still remain as personally and continually liable as long as that lease continues to renew in perpetuity. One little clause, obviously hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk. In the essence of time, we won't go through this in too much detail, other than be aware if you do have any options to renew. They are not, it is not term, it is not guaranteed term. We see so many the doctors think, oh, I got another 10 years. You don't. You have two 5-year options. If you do not give notice, in this case, less than 9 months prior to the end of the term, any of those remaining options to renew become null and void, in essence, rendering and having a huge impact by not allowing the buyer to get a loan, or now requiring the landlord to give more term just in order to sell your clinic. I'd worked with a doctor in Northern California, and she tried to sell her clinic 3 separate times. Each and every time, the landlord said no. So we had to pick up and relocate her. And devastatingly, as a result, we wanted to make sure that she had to relocate her clinic. So imagine being 73 years of age and having to pick up and relocate your clinic just to sell it. Last but not least is this was an example. This came from a doctor in the South who got this letter from what he thought was his friend, the landlord, which said, Doctor, as you know, your lease expires on X. Pursuant to 2.4 of your lease, you had an option to renew for 5 years. However, you were required to give me written notice of your intention to renew not later than 6 months prior to the expiration of the current term. By my calculations, you're required to give this no later than X. It was Friday, and this was the Monday morning, which you did not do. Please be advised that my broker will be placing a for sale sign in a conspicuous but non-intrusive place on the premises this week. And oh, by the way, he'll only show the premises during business hours. Great. So just as your chair side, right, suddenly you got a bunch of doctors walking behind you. The doctor had only been in this place for 3 years. So again, I share these because we are screaming from the rooftops to help make sure that you are aware of what's within the lease, knowing your leverage, and certainly coming up with a great long-term strategy. This was that forced relocation example I was sharing. So the last few pieces, and again, some knowledge pearls and key things to be aware of is time is leverage. This was a slide that, in essence, was shared to and at landlord conventions. Trust me, you do your own CE courses, landlords get to learn key pieces too. What they showed was a clock. And what they taught, right? Landlords teaching landlords, they taught that the best way of increasing their profits without a penny of additional expense is to imagine this as a clock and hands on the clock. And by stalling, delaying, or waiting until the last possible second, or hoping that the doctor doesn't remember that they have to send written notice in, is the easiest way for the landlord to dramatically increase rent without a penny of additional expense by doing nothing more than trying to stall, delay that renewal or new deal, right? But especially the renewal negotiations. So, 32 years in business. Number one, get all the information. Most doctors do not have a copy and or digital copy of the original lease from the original dentist, nor all the amendments, riders, exhibits, assignments, etc. These are key pieces that in order to do a proper review, it's so important you've got every piece. If you're not sure, right, there'll be a section here for it in a moment. Number two, have your lease professionally reviewed. Figure out your goals, career goals. When do you want to transfer? What are the objectives? Figure all that out before. Do you want to sell in 1 year, 2 years, or 20 years? That dramatically shifts the type of strategy as that lease is reviewed and looking through those particular risks. In addition, for those of you that joined late, we pulled up a bunch of locations and cities from where some of you are coming from and looked at a lot of the demographics, rental rates, vacancies, comp reports. If you are curious for yours, we'll have a section. Excuse me. We'll have a section for that shortly. In addition, number five, right, is to figure out what that carefully choreographed game of chess looks like. What is that first approach? What's the first counter? Second, third, what are our must-haves in the negotiation? What are our nice-to-haves? And what are things that we're willing to concede in order to help get our must-haves? Must have should be perhaps personal guarantees, continuing liability post sale, the assignability of the lease. Nice to haves might be exclusivity or the broadened type of work or use or procedures you can do in the space. Things that you might want to give up. Perhaps it's term. That's also good for you, though. Perhaps it's a little bit on rent or annual increase. Again, landlords care about term and rent. Those are the big pieces. How do we leverage that to our benefit while helping to mitigate risk for you? What, doctors, have we not done at this point? We have not yet picked up the phone and called the landlord. So please, for the love of all that's holy, do not get to the office tomorrow. Say to your office manager, Darcy, I watched this webinar and it's time to renegotiate our lease. And pick up the phone and call the landlord and say, Mr. Landlord, I want to start my lease negotiations. What do you want to charge me? And skip steps 1 through 5. So important. You've got a good process. You've known your ask, your walk away, and your mid between, then negotiating the financial clauses, then negotiating the business clauses, and basically not stop until you get to that final form lease agreement that you're satisfied with. So, having done this now over, as Cirrus has done now over 13,000 times, it does give a truly incredible perspective. The lease review, as mentioned before, what the heck is it? So, as I was showing a little bit before, part of it is getting the facts, right? Understanding rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, pulling up those datas, looking at the demographics, looking at the traffic patterns, looking at comparables in that area, looking at what other tenants are paying, what other doctors are paying in the area, right? What is as much human information that we can drum up about the landlord and how many locations they have? Looking through that lease, looking for any particular red flags goes an absolutely long, long way, and understanding each and every component of it. So, in appreciation for everyone's time, what we do is offer that as a complimentary piece. An appreciation for everyone's time this evening, where we'll do an analysis of the lease, pull the demographic report, spend an hour with you and or your team or your spouse, right, to go through that particular lease. What we've done to make it easy, based on the hundreds of these we've done in the past, right, is a little exit so that if you are curious about your individual rental rates, if you're curious about that market and report I showed today, there's a quick section to make sure you click on question number 5 that yes, you'd like more information. Sorry, number 4, right? Specifically about that lease review, rental rate analysis, demographic, etc. As everyone's filling that through, if you've got some additional questions particular to your area, if you're curious about some demographics, I'm happy to pull those up live in terms of the generic city or otherwise. And definitely the Q&A is open. Happy to cover certainly a few of those to go through and ensure that you're not feeling alone in all of this. I think the big shift is, look at it from a different perspective. You went through 10 years of post-secondary education. You have perhaps even gone through even more with additional specialty work, etc. How much training did you have on the business side of dentistry? How much time had you spent being taught about the important clauses within a employment contract or a lease negotiation contract? When you became a business owner and you hired your first employee, right? How far out of your comfort zone did you feel? Right? So don't beat yourself up. This is, unfortunately, we're part of Tufts fourth year. I'm on the faculty for the Schulich School of Business, and as it pertains to their mini MBA program, specifically for dentists, because it's not in the agenda. So what becomes important is to just know, right? Be aware, assemble that professional team, as we mentioned before, and help prepare yourself to maximize those eventual practice sale proceeds. Being a business owner is tough, and so many doctors love the clinical side but hate the business side. I hate dealing the fact that, Marcy doesn't like listening to Jenny's music, or, my hygienist, quit and left me high and dry, They don't care about my business. They don't care about me. It's a challenge, right? And you've got to do your best to support the team, build great solid teams, but unfortunately, right, that can go sideways upon many different pieces. Um, West LA, Santa Monica. So I used to live sort of very close to Pico and Ocean. Let me pull up an example here. So, Santa Monica. I spent about 6.5 years down there, and it was one of my favorite places on earth. So, obviously, as you know, West LA, Santa Monica, etc., can be unique, Third Street Promenade notwithstanding. So, I lived at the base of the 90. I'd also lived towards the base of the 10. So, yes, know it quite well. So, part of what we do for the doctor's Q&A here. Oh, can we see? All right, perfect. You should be able to see that now. So part of it is here's Santa Monica proper. Here are all the commercial tenant pieces of data. So in the quote unquote Santa Monica market, it is we have access to 5,033 properties for 992 spaces currently for lease. So when you say, hey, what is it generally? As you can imagine, lots and lots and lots of data points. So, right, I assuming we're not talking Ocean Avenue or Third Street Promenade, but something in between. So we can look at anything. This was built in 1938, and we can start to look at all sorts of different components. So first of all, what do we know about the landlord? What do we know about the area, the property? So there's three different buckets when we're talking about this location or Wilshire Avenue. And we can do specifics offline. But let's just say it's sort of North Santa Monica towards West LA, Brentwood type thing. So, for example, we can look at that Santa Monica submarket. So now here's what the changes have done. Here's what the metrics look like. Here's what it is for that area property. Here's what it is for similar 1 to 3 star type similar properties in that market. It's sort of a custom range rather than an A, B, or C because everybody considers that differently. Then it boils down to this, right? What do vacancy rates look like? Well, vacancy rates right now are incredibly high, right? Q2 for 2025 was 12.79%, right? The fires, the redevelopments, the challenges, lots of changes. Absorption, delivers, asking rents. That's interesting too. Asking rents are down 2.8%, high off the usual key performance indicators. Asking rents still remain high. Everybody's, holding on to once was and what will be again. And then it's all this other pieces of data. So again, to do it for Wilshire Avenue or otherwise, we can certainly take that offline. If you didn't already, certainly request that lease review, rental rate analysis, etc. And happy to set up some time to go through that particular building, so we're not, disclosing any confidential information or otherwise here in generalities. But this is again just a great resource to help get a much better understanding. Let it be for Los Angeles, Santa Monica, or similar, that gives those good comparisons. So we're going in with data. Data always helps from start to finish. Any additional questions? Timing, good question. So really, again, starting the process typically 2 years prior to the lease expiry becomes critically important. Making sure that you've got your professional team aligned, let it be for buying your first clinic, building your first clinic, expanding, renovating, relocating. Any of those core components can be a massive surprise, challenge, or impact. And the amount of accountants or otherwise that say, oh gosh, the doctor just told me they bought a new clinic. They didn't tell me about it, right? We didn't set up the corpse. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. So again, looping in that professional team, I know you can get in the emotion of it. The practice broker says, hey, I've got three other doctors that want this, space together. Things move fast. Emotions get through. Real estate broker says, oh, you got to sign this now or else, three other dentists are interested. Just realize again, the you are a fantastic tenant. In my opinion, the best tenant in out there. So therefore, what are some key things to do to maximize that and make sure that you're not falling into any unforeseen consequences, traps, or helping to limit or impact the eventual saleability of the clinic? So absolutely, right? These are great questions to reach out to the personal attorney for as far as your wills and estate planning, if that hasn't been done, right? Making sure that you've got your lease analyzed for risks and other components. And truly appreciate everyone's time as we wrap up the hour on the nose. Again, we'll be processing the CE credits within a 10 business day period. We appreciate everyone's attention, great questions, great poll results, etc. We'll certainly follow up. We'll help you to make sure that you've got a good or at least better understanding as to the risks in the lease. The goals was not to make everybody a dental office lease expert, but to purely shift the perspective of the impact of that lease and how it can prepare you for that eventual sale. On that note, everyone, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciated. Again, my name is Eric Pook, owner and CEO of Cirrus Consulting Group. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening and God bless. Good luck. Talk soon.